Yes, we have made strides in creating funds and putting money and dollars towards starting to invest in women, but 0.1% of all venture capital goes to women of color. So even though less than 5% of venture capital goes to women, and that's a horrible number that we have to improve upon, let's talk about why women of color are being left out of that story completely.
That was Nathalie Molina Nino, founder of Brava Investments. I'm Lucy Norris, and this is Views from the Top. Today I had the pleasure of sitting down and talking with Nathalie about tech, empowerment, shocking statistics, and what we can do if we want to shape the world in which we live. Nathalie, I'm very excited to talk to you. I know that there's a lot that we'll be covering with Brava Investments, but I want to talk, to start off with, about the journey and how you got to where you are today. So I heard that you actually found your first business by accident. Tell me a little bit about that, where this whole entrepreneurial life started.
I mean, I would argue that the entrepreneurial lifestyle started because I had entrepreneurial parents, and I probably got my MBA at the dining room table. But no, I was in college. I had a student job. I was, making what students make, probably minimum, running a computer lab. And what do a bunch of bored college students do in a computer lab in the mid-90s, when technology is going through this massive shift and the internet is starting to really become ubiquitous? We taught each other to code, and that's just what we did for fun. And we tinkered and we made things. And then fast forward to a motorcycle accident. Ending up, my only form of transportation was a motorcycle in college. Without that, I had no form of transportation. And so I was scrappy and I was young and I was fearless. And I went to this used car dealership and I noticed he didn't have a website. And I also noticed that there was a Jeep that I could buy for double what I had. So I couldn't afford it. And I said, look, I'll pay you half of what you're asking, and for the other half, I'll make you a website. And the guy, to my surprise, said yes. So that was my first company. I made websites.
And you were good at negotiating at the same time.
And I was, I'm pretty good at negotiating.
So you start making websites for a variety of different companies. And then where does that lead you?
So what that led me to do is to discover the world where I then spent the rest of my career, which is the world of globalization of tech specifically. So think of a video game, right, that works beautifully in American English and then has to be completely reversed and flipped as a mirror image for Hebrew and Arabic, where you read from right to left instead of left to right. Or think of even the marketing, the strategy, the various different things that tech products have to think about when they go international, right? You can't take a product, for example, I'm going to stick to the games because people love those examples, but think about a game about World War II, right? And now you're going to export it to Japan. You're going to have to look at it from a different lens, and a typical Japanese audience is going to notice if you get the uniforms wrong, if you get, subtle little details wrong. They're looking at events and culture from a different perspective. So even something like a technology product, from a technical standpoint, from a cultural standpoint, language, people get really upset if you go watch a Disney movie in Spanish and they got the accent wrong or they got the colloquialisms wrong. All those things matter.
Nathalie shared with us her experience as a young entrepreneur and the advantages that she's had as a woman in tech in the 90s compared to females today who were working in the exact same space. So what were some of the challenges that you came up against as a female in the tech industry?
Broadly?
Yeah, broadly. We'll just start off broad and then we'll narrow in, because I feel like we're going to be doing a lot of jumping because your career is so vast. And I want to cover as much as I can and also get to the advice and the things that you've learned.
Sure.
So that up-and-coming entrepreneurs can learn from what you've already done.
I love vast. It's much better than saying old.
No. Well, when you've accomplished so much at your age, I mean, I don't know how old you are, but you look fantastic.
Thank you. Broadly, I would say I think as a woman in tech, especially starting off in the 90s, I think that I had a little bit of an advantage relative to women coming up now. And so to the point of up-and-coming women entrepreneurs now, I have a lot of empathy for what they're going through, because in the early 90s, and then leading into sort of mid to late 90s, you still had a lot of women engineers. We had double the number of women graduating in engineering in the 80s than we do now. So this problem of the lack of women in tech is very real. And so back then, I did have more women colleagues, not so much women founders, for sure. And yeah, I spent most of my career being the only woman in the room. It gets lonely. I definitely spent my career being the only Latina for miles. And apart from being lonely, I think it happens that you have few reference points and you have few mentors who have experienced what you've experienced. I've had great mentors from, that have been all genders, but it's different. It's different to have someone who's actually been through it, who's been that only woman in the room, to tell you these are the strategies, these are the ways to be heard, these are the ways to circumvent some of the obstacles that we all face. Not having those sort of mentors, people that had done it before, not having a frame of reference of other women founders in tech to learn from is tough. It's super tough. And what ends up happening is certainly this happened to me in my youth. I felt the need to look at the models that men were outlining or showing by example and feeling like I had to top them, right? I had to be better. It had to be perfect. If they were tough, I had to be tougher. And what it created was a really tough persona, right? One that in the early 2000s I finally realized was not me. A couple of people have called it my monster boss years. Really, really tough times where I realized that I had lost my humanity in the process of trying to be that tough founder. And that's not the strategy to take. I would say if I were to give anyone advice, it would be not to lose yourself modeling what other unhealthy management styles look like.
As we discussed the pressures that come with being a leader, Nathalie opened up about her monster boss years, as she calls them, and how this attitude changed with time as she wanted a better approach to her profession and team. What did you learn from those monster boss years, though? Yeah. What were some of the things that you did take and move forwards with?
I learned that the principles of who I was as a human being growing up don't shift when you're in a management position, don't shift when you suddenly have thousands of people reporting to you in an organization. You fundamentally have to remain true to that sort of nucleus of who you are. And that is going to be the principal thing that influences your management style. It should be, not the frame of reference, not what you see around you. I grew up being taught to be kind. And I grew up being taught to be accountable, and basic things about how to be a human being. And in becoming a manager, I lost sight of some of those things. And I think that was the biggest lesson for me is, at the end of the day, managing people is just being human, and maybe doing it a little more effectively.
Nathalie spoke about what she thought was missing in the industry when it came to investing in women, and how she chooses the companies that impact women based on her own sense of urgency. She went into depth on how there's been a lot of optics over the last few years, and then explained what she means when she's talking about making an impact and how she would define that. So what was missing in the industry that you felt Brava Investments could move forwards and fulfill and offer a solution to?
Yeah. The metaphor that I've been using that I think is helpful is, if you think about attacking the problem of a disease, right? Let's say a cancer, right? You have people who are on the front lines who are dealing it on a micro level. So that oncologist that deals one by one with people with cancer, right? And then you have the person who's dealing with it at a macro level, who's maybe sitting at the UN or sitting at one of these global organizations, looking at it from a global perspective. Right. What I found was missing in the industry around investing in women was that there were too many of these surgical, and I wouldn't say too many. Everyone in the space felt like they were focusing on that surgical micro level. This is how we attack the problem.
Right.
And what I mean is that most everyone in the space is focusing on investing in women entrepreneurs. And what I kept doing is I kept seeing that at a macro level, when we look at the problem globally, there wasn't anybody looking at it from that perspective.
Right.
And the result And I think it's really important for all of us in the industry of investing in women. We have to stop and look at the unintended consequences of our work. For those of us that have been doing it for a long time, we're not talking about the fact that, yes, we have made strides in creating funds and putting money and dollars towards starting to invest in women, but 0.1% of all venture capital goes to women of color. So even though less than 5% of venture capital goes to women, and that's a horrible number that we have to improve upon, let's talk about why women of color are being left out of that story completely.
And why is that?
I think that it's because of something that I've been calling the valley of death, which is that on one hand, there are more Black women starting businesses than anyone else in this country, and yet none of them are getting venture capital. And I think that we make the mistake of conflating those Black women entrepreneurs, and Latinas are not far behind, conflating that as deal flow for venture capital, for example. But the reality is that most of those businesses, 80% of them, are micro businesses. They are home-based businesses. They are somebody who's a massage therapist. They're a taco truck, a restaurant. They're sort of these micro businesses that are not ready to be in front of a venture capitalist asking for a Series A. In fact, they probably don't even know what a Series A is. So there's a lot of work that has to happen to get those micro businesses to be scalable and to be investable businesses. And I think that what's missing is networks, capital, and also communities. So a venture capitalist will often use the term friends and family, right? They expect you to have raised your friends and family before you even knock on their door. What if you come from a community where your friends and family can barely make ends meet, right? And so I think that there's something about looking at it from a systemic standpoint where you're not focused on making one woman a millionaire and finding the unicorns. You're taking entire communities and you're lifting them up. And in order to do that, especially if you have a sense of urgency, the way that I do, then it's all hands on deck. It's anybody who is in the business of putting money in the wallets of as many women as possible should get investment. And so if some guy comes to me tomorrow and says, Natalie, I've found the cure to breast cancer, I'm not going to not fund him because it's not a woman-led business. It's a business that will impact millions of women, and that's what I care about. So,
tell us about some of the other companies and businesses that you're bringing together at Brava Investments.
So we're new. I was saying to someone recently that we're probably punching a bit above our weight. We've gotten some good attention, but we're new. We just launched in October. We were very lucky. We have a partnership with the United States of Women, and we were able to launch our company at the White House at South by Southlawn. But so we're only a few months old. We are working on a few portfolio companies. None of them have been announced yet, but the ones that are exciting to me and the ones that I'm hoping to stay in communication with, whether we invest in them or not, are, for example, the first ever venture bank in New York City, founded by 2 women. That's super exciting, right? A venture bank that is designed to support up-and-coming startups, started by 2 women, dedicated to diversity, and based in New York City. In New York City, we have twice as many women entrepreneurs as we do in Silicon Valley, so it's a perfect fit in many ways. Another company that I'm looking at is a software company called Glassbreakers. I love them. It's a software solution to the problem of women and minorities leaving corporate. Especially leaving at the volume that they're leaving. It tends to be that women who are groomed to get into those executive positions tend to drop off well before they ever get to VP or any of these senior positions. And so this software essentially helps people create peer mentorships and then helps the companies retain these folks, hopefully, so that they do get to those executive positions.
Fantastic.
So it's a great one. And it's software. It's an area that I know very well. It also happens to be female-led, which is great. And then the company that we are most excited about and the company that we're furthest along with, probably by the time anything with this video happens, it'll be our first portfolio company, is a company that was founded by 2 male obstetricians. And it will be the first ever birth control pill to go over the counter in the United States.
Wow. And how did you even come across them? How did you find these entrepreneurs? How do you source these businesses?
It's a great question. So prior to launching Brava, I co-founded a Center for Women Entrepreneurs at Columbia University at Barnard. That helped, having a pipeline of amazing businesses coming to me at one of the leading, educational institutions in the world. It meant that, I literally created great programs, advocacy, education, matchmaking programs, and they came to me. And so for the last 6 or so years, I had a platform where I really was able to get access inadvertently to what now is deal flow. But also media, I have to say. We put ourselves out there at the very beginning when we launched at the White House as a new kind of investment company. We're not a fund.
Right.
We've intentionally created our structure as a hold co, very much in that style of Berkshire Hathaway. And the logic for me is that we want to be doing long-term investing. If a company that we invest in gets acquired or goes public, fantastic. But if it's a company that's spitting out cash every quarter, and it's a company that is a viable long-term investment, why not just hold on to them and make sure that they're successful and make sure that they grow?
So Nathalie, how would you describe what it means to make a purposeful, meaningful investment?
I love that question because I think that part of why we created Brava is to redefine that. So my sense is that we are now at a point of inflection and maybe even a point of maturity in the space of investing and then making an impact as well. In that I think that over the course of the last decade plus, there's been a lot of optics. There have been a lot of things that appear to be making an impact, but you look under the surface and not so much, right? There's also been a lot of variation on what impact means. I worry about ETFs that purport to support women, for example, but the only criteria is that you have X number of women on the boards. My concern with something like that is, okay, it could be a coal company with X number of women on the boards. It could be a porn company with X number of women on the boards. Are we really going to call that impact? My sense is that we have to be more thoughtful and we really have to raise the bar on what that means. And so at Brava, what it means is first, the company has to be viable, it has to be scalable, it has to be a great investment that's going to get market or better than market returns. And I feel really strongly about that first point because until we make investing in women profitable, just as profitable as anything else, it's never going to be mainstreamed.
Right.
So that's to me the first thing. It's got to be a viable business. And then the second piece is impact at scale. So I'm not so interested in a company that's going to make 5 or 6 women financially independent. There's nothing wrong with a company like that. But I want to take the resources that we have and the influence that we have and the amazing people that we have at the table to make catalytic impact. So it has to be the kind of company that can scale and ultimately be able to make hundreds of thousands and maybe even millions of women economically independent. If they can do that, then I know that I'm making an impact.
You had mentioned earlier this sense of urgency that we have, or that you have. I feel like I'm including myself.
Welcome to the family.
That you at Brava Investments have. Where is that sense of urgency coming from? For you?
Yeah, for me personally, it's these numbers and it's also the experience. Looking at someone like my mother, for example, who is very entrepreneurial, who is brilliant, who could have easily been a successful entrepreneur, but for the fact that because my father was entrepreneurial, we as a family had to think about things like, how are we going to have health insurance? How are we going to pay for Nathalie to go to college? How are we going to pay for the basics, right? Immigrant parents, moved here from South America, wanting to be sure that they were giving a better life to their children. It meant that choices had to be made, right? And so my mother ended up taking a job at a grocery store so that we could have health insurance, so that we could have a stable income while we were also pursuing entrepreneurial ventures. Those are the sorts of choices that I think women, especially women of color in this country, make every day. And for me, the sense of urgency is that we can't wait for someone to become a billionaire and pay it forward the way that someone like Melinda Gates has done, which I think is fantastic.
Right.
But we can't keep waiting for multiple generations for these things to trickle down. The idea of believing in trickle-down economics is no more valid when it comes to women as it was when Reagan was in office. It's just not a thing. It's not real. It doesn't exist. And so for me, it's a question of, do you invest in something that 10, 15 years from now will benefit women, or do you invest in something that tomorrow does it? And to me, I mean, the options are clear. I have to choose B, right?
And I want to finish off this conversation by asking you, what are some other conversations that need to take place for us to become aware of this urgency?
I think a big one, and I think it can be tough, is the inclusion of men into the story. If you have urgency, and I think everyone should, in solving the problem of not just the lack of investing in women, but the lack of investing in all women. Otherwise, we may as well just call it the movement to invest in white women, and I don't think anybody wants that to be the case. If we really have that sense of urgency, then, as I said before, we really need all hands on deck. And it seems silly to me that we would exclude the people who today have the most power, the most influence, and the most capital. That happens to be, in our country, white men. And so I don't see it as an optional. I think white men, especially people with influence, with power, with capital, have to be a part of the solution. When we launched Brava, there was someone in the media that actually criticized and said something along the lines of, I just read about a investment company that purports to support women, and yet most of the partners appear to be white men. My response to that, press person is just, that's by design.
Right.
Again, they hold the keys to the rooms that we want access to, so they should be a part of the solution. A friend of mine called it the "you broke it, you fix it" strategy. I don't know that I would go public with that as the Brava, moniker.
Maybe not the tagline.
No, it's probably not our tagline, but I get the sentiment, and I don't think she's that far wrong.
If you want to contact Nathalie to find out more about Brava Investments, this is how you do it. So that's all from us here today, but Tamara, who can we expect to see next time?
Well, next week I'm sitting down with Francine Lafrac, and she's going to explain to me what philanthrocapitalism is.
Very interesting. So make sure you join Tamara and Francine. I'll see you next time. I'm Lucy Norris, and you've been watching Views from the Top.